Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Wednesday, February 7th. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Ali Abunimah, Asa Winstanley, Jon Elmer, and Tamara Nassar. It's day 124 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. We have a full show for you today, including a report from a protest outside of Secretary of State Antony Blinken's house, news about a major boycott victory in Japan against an Israeli weapons maker explicitly as a consequence of the International Court of Justice's ruling, a discussion on the possibilities of a ceasefire, and of course, analysis of the Palestinian resistance's defense of Gaza. But first, here is the news. Israel's military campaign in Gaza has resulted in at least 100,000 Palestinians killed, injured, or missing and presumed dead, around 4% of the population of 2.3 million, as it enters its fifth month, reports our colleague Maureen Claire Murphy. The following is from her latest report. 60% of the more than 27,000 Palestinian fatalities recorded by the health ministry in Gaza since October 7th were women and children. At least 17,000 children in Gaza are unaccompanied or separated from their family, according to UNICEF. Khan Yunis in southern Gaza was bearing the brunt of the bombardment while Palestinian resistance groups fought Israeli ground forces across much of Gaza in recent days, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has reported. Israeli forces bombed residential blocks and high-rises in multiple areas of Khan Yunis on Monday, causing significant destruction. Heavy fighting continues near Nasser Medical Complex and Al-Amal Hospital in Khan Yunis, quote, jeopardizing the safety of medical staff, the wounded, and the sick, as well as thousands of internally displaced persons, according to the UN. While details of a possible ceasefire are being discussed in Doha, Maureen writes that, quote, 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿 𝐈𝐧𝐭𝐫𝐿, the Israeli defense minister, told troops that, quote, we are completing the mission in Khan Yunis and we will reach Rafah as well and eliminate every terrorist there who threatens to harm us. Three prominent Palestinian human rights groups warned Monday that an expansion of Israel's ground operations in Rafah, in the southernmost area of Gaza, appears to be imminent. Such an escalation, quote, would significantly exacerbate the ongoing genocidal acts perpetrated by the Israeli military and authorities against the Palestinian population in Gaza, the rights groups warned. Maureen Claire Murphy writes that, quote, some 1.3 million Palestinians, more than half of Gaza's population, are currently concentrated in Rafah after being displaced from other areas of the territory. Given the current population density of the area, an attack on Rafah could, quote, result in an unprecedented loss of Palestinian lives, according to the rights groups. It may also force hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza to flee to Egypt, quote, which would constitute the crime of forcible deportation, the groups added. The potential scenario could surpass the number of Palestinians forcibly expelled by Zionist militias and the Israeli military during the 1948 Nakba, they said. To that end, the majority of all buildings in Gaza have likely been damaged or destroyed, according to an analysis of satellite data, Maureen reports. The UN estimates that more than 650,000 displaced Palestinians in Gaza, quote, will have no home to return to, and that many more will be unable to return immediately due to the level of damage surrounding infrastructure, as well as the risk posed by explosive remnants of war. For much more reportage on the situation on the ground in Gaza, read Maureen Claire Murphy's latest report, Ceasefire Elusive as Gaza Genocide Enters Fifth Month, on electronicintifada.net. Meanwhile, UNRWA, the UN Agency for Palestine Refugees, will be forced to shut down its operations as soon as the end of the month if funding is not restored, according to the agency's director, Philippe Lazzarini. Israel has not let up on the attacks against the agency and humanitarian aid deliveries. The UN agency said that a convoy carrying food aid was hit by Israeli naval gunfire while waiting to move into northern Gaza on Monday. 16 donor countries, including the U.S., the agency's largest funder, suspended $440 million worth of aid after Israel made unverified allegations that a handful of UNRWA's staff in Gaza were involved in the October 7th attacks. However, as Sharon Jang at 𝐓𝐿 reported on Tuesday, quote, a key Israeli intelligence dossier used by countries to justify defunding the primary aid group for Palestinian refugees contains no evidence to back up Israel's allegations against the group. Israeli officials, Jang writes, were reportedly shocked that the information had even gotten out to foreign officials. The New York Times reported that, quote, Israel has made so many accusations against UNRWA over the years that no one expected this claim to be the one that stuck, the Israeli Foreign Ministry officials said. Our colleague Michael F. Brown writes that, quote, Israel has long sought to disrupt and destroy UNRWA, the UN agency established in 1949, specifically to protect the Palestinian refugees expelled by Israel during the Nakba. UNRWA provides essential health and educational services to Palestinian refugees in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip, as well as in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Israel's long-held intention to destroy UNRWA was revitalized late last year when Israel's foreign ministry privately laid out plans to push the agency out of Gaza altogether, Michael F. Brown writes. Maureen Claire Murphy, in her report for the Electronic Intifada last week, writes that, quote, Palestinian human rights groups warned that the suspension of funds leading to the halt of humanitarian aid in Gaza could constitute complicity in genocide. This is particularly so in the case of the U.S. and Germany, two of UNRWA's primary donors. The Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention said that the decision to suspend funding, quote, represents a shift by several countries from potential complicity in genocide to direct involvement in engineered famine. The institute added that, quote, it is an attack on what remains of personal security, liberty, health, and dignity in Palestine. The UN Agency for Palestine Refugees is the largest provider of humanitarian aid in Gaza, where the vast majority of the population depend on it for their sheer survival, UNRWA said last week. 2/3 of Gaza's population of 2.3 million are refugees registered with UNRWA. More than 150 UNRWA staff are among the some 27,000 people killed in Gaza since October 7th, and more than 140 of the agency's facilities have been damaged or destroyed, including its Gaza City headquarters. And that was from Maureen Claire Murphy's report, Funding Freeze Could Halt UNRWA Operations by End of Month. And for more, read Michael Brown's in-depth analysis, States Gutting UNRWA Are Complicit in Genocide, both on electronicintifada.net. And an update from a story we covered last week on the live stream. On last Wednesday's show, we were joined by our friend Layla El-Haddad, who talked about her role testifying as one of the plaintiffs in a federal case brought by Palestinian Americans against the Biden administration over complicity in Israel's genocide. The judge issued his ruling last week, and even though he dismissed the case on jurisdictional grounds, explaining that the court lacked power to resolve a matter of foreign policy, he did acknowledge the, quote, undisputed evidence that Israel's ongoing siege against Palestinians in Gaza is, quote, intended to eradicate a whole people and therefore plausibly falls within the international prohibition against genocide. U.S. District Judge Jeffrey White called it a rare instance where, quote, the preferred outcome is inaccessible to the court. Quote, it is every individual's obligation to confront the current siege in Gaza, the judge wrote. And Catherine Gallagher, senior staff attorney with the Center for Constitutional Rights, said that, quote, while we strongly disagree with the court's ultimate jurisdictional ruling, we urge the Biden administration to heed the judge's call to examine and end its deadly course of action. Together with our plaintiffs, we will pursue all legal avenues to stop the genocide and save Palestinian lives, Gallagher said. For more, read my piece, U.S. Judge rebukes Biden's unflagging support for war on Gaza. And finally, an excerpt from one of our feature stories written by our contributor Sundos Al-Fayumi in Gaza. Quote, "I am very worried about my sister Dua," she writes. "She is a patient at Al-Amal Hospital, located in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. The hospital has been under Israeli siege for more than 2 weeks. Dua has been paralyzed because of an Israeli attack on Al-Burej refugee camp, central Gaza, in October. She needs surgery outside Gaza, but the siege on the hospital means that she cannot leave." Read more from Sundos Al-Fayyoumi's feature, "My Sister is Under Siege in a Gaza Hospital," on electronicintifada.net. Those are just some of the many stories we've published on the Electronic Intifada over the last few days. Head over to electronicintifada.net for much more. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman. And as Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, tours the region, his house near Washington, D.C. continues to be the site of 24-hour protests against his direct complicity in and support for Israel's genocide. Blinken and his family hear the protests day and night and see them whenever they leave home. We're joined now by Hazami Barmada, an activist and social entrepreneur who has been leading the protest. Hazami, it's so good to have you with us today.
Hi, thank you all for having me.
So tell us what you are up to right now, where you are, and what's been happening.
So we are here on the side of the road. What is behind me right here is the home of Secretary of State Antony Blinken on this very narrow road in McLean, Virginia. We have been camping out in makeshift tents on both sides of the roads from the evening of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice order, and also coincidentally the eve of the day, the federal court case against the Biden administration, specifically Blinken, Biden, and Austin. We are out here, and every time they leave or enter their home, as you might see behind me, we doused the street and the cars with this red symbolic blood of Gaza's children, and we have signage all over the place that reminds Blinken of his direct role in enabling, funding, normalizing, endorsing, and in essence perpetuating an ongoing genocide against the Palestinian people.
And Hazami, you told us that we know that Antony Blinken today is in Israel to discuss the latest ceasefire proposal. And you told us a little while ago that his wife just left home a little while ago. Did she hear you?
Yes, absolutely. The wife of Blinken comes by us numerous times a day. We know they've changed the security apparatus of how she comes in and out of the home due to her growing discomfort that we've not only heard about directly from both the police and the security staff themselves, but also in the way she drives. As we are lined on both sides of the road and right by the gate. So we see her entering and exiting. We also see the children in the car, although they've put blankets and towels over the windows of the vehicles. And she not only sees us and hears us, but is also very clearly uncomfortable. And for those that don't know, Blinken's wife, Evan Ryan, actually works for the administration. She's the cabinet secretary. And Blinken himself has a company which she benefits financially from that actually supports national security, which, the military industrial complex is connected to. And so, we often say that, unfortunately, in Gaza, there's constantly this idea of collective collateral damage. There is not, you don't spare the rest of society just because you're supposedly going after Hamas. And I often say, two cars that pass by here is, if this was an operation to eliminate Hamas, if Hamas was hiding in Tel Aviv, would you bomb it to the ground? And if your answer is no, then it's not about Hamas. It's about the fact that you perceive Palestinian lives to be dispensable, which is why we have no problem at all screaming at and targeting the family and the folks that work to enable Blinken living this life behind this wall. I must also say that the security fence has been added recently with mesh, so you can't see as easily through the gate, and then additional cameras have been added to the various entrances here as we've been out here.
So I think we actually have a video. It's not from today, it's from another day when you actually greeted Antony Blinken in person, at least when he was in his car. We can take a look at that. Now he can clearly see you. Oh, there you go. There goes the blood. You must have a significant budget for red paint.
We have a lot of amazing volunteers who actually make this paint for us. The paint recipe itself is one of the most asked about questions that I get on my social media. We mix it with tempera paint, which is all washable and food coloring and cornstarch. So it is not only edible, but also safe to use, which is important just from a ability to continue to do this type of action. We've actually seen Blinken numerous times. The video you just showed is right before his last trip to Tel Aviv. So we've actually been here repeatedly since then, and just said goodbye to him on his way out the door this time around, also on his way also to the Middle East. He's been there numerous times since we've been here. But yes, we see his motorcade coming to and from work numerous times a day, sometimes every single day for the last couple of weeks.
And are you planning to stay there for the long term?
You know, honestly, I didn't necessarily have a plan in mind when we did this. We've been doing direct actions as a group, a grassroots movement, now for, over 110 days, all over what we call institutions of power. We physically put our bodies on the ground, doing die-ins. We've done blood dumps in front of staff entrances of the White House and State Department, where staff literally have to physically walk over the blood that we dump as they approach
We can
us.
actually look at that. Yeah, let's take a look.
Yep.
So they have to walk through this on their way to work.
They do, and it's extremely uncomfortable, and that's exactly the point. Our goal is to center the discomfort. Our goal is to highlight the hypocrisy. Our goal is to make sure that American officials and folks that work in this administration, and there they are trying to go around us, for example, and I tell them you can try to go around us, but you can't avoid your conscience. And we intentionally go during business hours directly to the people that are directly responsible for these policies, for the mis and disinformation that is being peddled to justify the violence and the genocide against the Palestinian people. And it is very important for us to be there constantly and persistently for days and days on end. We are there almost daily at these different entrances. We alternate between the entrances. But, again, the point of us is that politicians in the United States are able to sanitize their lives, sanitize their daily lives from the impacts and the reality of what they do in different parts of the world. It's why we call this 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Blinken, right? So we've heard repeatedly the administration has not been hard enough on settlements, illegal settlements in the West Bank and on stolen land throughout Israel. And for us, our kind of initial joke was, since Blinken is so okay with settlements, then he should be okay with this one. Because so often we find that American politicians and folks that are funding, fueling, and normalizing this are somehow okay with it until it's on their soil, until it's in their space, until it impacts them and their families. And that is the direct reason that we are right here, where we do get criticism, where people say, oh, Blinken's family are innocent to this, or something to the effect of, well, doesn't he deserve to rest? Why should Blinken be able to come home at 5 p.m. and rest in this ivory tower with all the security when the children in Gaza and the families in Gaza have no moment of rest, with American-made bombs and American-made military apparatus being used against them 24/7, with no place to call home, with no security, with no safety? And so there's no such thing as being off hours when the genocide is ongoing, and you are directly complicit in peddling lies over and over and over again, including, for example, the lie he peddled about UNRWA, and seeing very credible evidence literally happened while we were right here in these tents that were flooded. And in real time, we saw tents in Gaza that were flooded. Obviously, it's no comparison, because people in Gaza have no food. It's mass starvation, intentional starvation. People have no access to warm blankets or clothes or anything, where we are able to, to change and to get people to come bring us towels. But we invited Blinken on that day to come out and join us in these tents, to experience just a tiny, 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 tiny fraction, which isn't even comparable, of what it's like to be in cold, in rain, outside on the streets with all this traffic around him. And of course, he denied and didn't even acknowledge our existence out here. But we know that they're impacted by it. We know because of the changing in all the security around here. And also, I see his face. I look directly in his face every single morning, because I'm on that exact side of the street. And I look through the window, not even a foot and a half away from his face. And I see it. And he looks tired. He looks frustrated. He looks beat down. So does his wife, who has no tinting on her windows. We see her face very clearly. And to me, that is success.
Good. Hazami, can you talk a little bit about the legality of these protests? I know that a lot of Americans think that this is, you'd be swept up by police immediately. That police would be very keen on shutting this kind of protest down, but it is actually very, very legal and a part of our very our quickly waning civil rights. But can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I think, even I was very intimidated when we first started doing this type of work. We came out to Blinken's house in December, and I remember we used to park way down there and walk up this dark, windy street, being really afraid. And now we've literally occupied not only both sides of the street, but all the parking all around this space is now occupied by our group. I think the reality of legality is a lot of protesters don't know our rights. It's really important to understand local rights and local laws, but then also how those intersect with, for example, protected federal activity of First Amendment rights. We, for example, know that being here in Arlington law, which is Blinken's house is actually on the property line between Arlington and Fairfax, right there, literally at that car, is the line between Fairfax and Arlington County. So his property is the furthest house on the property line between the different counties. In Arlington County, there are certain restrictions to sound ordinance, to what you can and cannot do on public spaces. We also pulled the plot of land, so I was able to see the actual plot of land and highlighted the fact that actually Blinken's fence actually sits feet past their property line, which is something that I'll be following up with the county on separately. It appears that their property line is actually further back and their gate actually transgresses over public property. So the area that we stand, where I took the video from that you showed of Blinken, actually is public property. Thus, they cannot ask us to leave from that location. We remind the police often. They often come trying to bully us. Secret Service tries to bully us. There's a lot of different types of security personnel around here, from Secret Service to State Department security personnel. We've seen all types of security when we do things at the Israeli ambassador's home. Folks from the State Department get deployed out to us also. But knowing your rights, and then also knowing that a lot of police and security expect people not to know their rights. So we printed out the plot of land. I print out the legal codes. I print out all of the items that also show that federal law sometimes trumps local law in the case that religious and political activities are actually protected First Amendment. And so in those cases, the sound ordinance of Arlington County are no longer applicable to us. Now, we have been stopped from using musical instruments and big stereos. On the first 4 days we were here, we had a huge sound system, and I mean huge sound system. We had about 18 megaphones with sirens spinning around the clock. And we know it drove them absolutely crazy, because the neighbors 4 houses down, who are actually all very supportive of us, came and told us that their entire house was shaking from the sound. Now, that we were told that we could no longer do because of a state law in Virginia that's unfortunately very vaguely written. And we are working with an expert team of lawyers now to try to understand, because it says you cannot disturb, and I quote, tranquility of house. What does tranquility of house mean? How is that defined? And again, we push back often and say, why is it that people here can live in tranquility of homes protected when, again, they commit atrocities? So we use our voices, which is why my voice is pretty, mabhoo. I don't know how to even say that in English.
Of course, yeah.
Doesn't work well. But we continue, and we have a lot of people that come out through the day and through the night, honking their horns, coming to scream with us. And so, in unison, when you have 30, 40, 50 people yelling, facing a house, it still delivers a very strong message without the sound equipment.
Well, it's really incredible. And I want to say, from my personal perspective, and this is why we were so keen to have you on today and let people see what you're doing. I can think of almost nothing else that is more important than what you're doing right now. Everything, people. I mean, let me be clear. All of the demonstrations, the rallies, the activism, contacting representatives, it's all important. But there's something so visceral to this, because I think it is so easy. It's even easy for us to shut out what's happening in Gaza, but it's even easier if you are protected and coddled by wealth and comfort and by the security apparatus of the United States government. So to pierce through that and tell Antony Blinken that there is a direct line between the things he says and does and the murdered babies in Gaza is so important. I think that that is absolutely amazing. And not just with Blinken, but also with the White House stuff. And as you also mentioned, the Israeli ambassador. Let's take a look at your action outside the Israeli ambassador's home in Washington.
This morning in front of the house of the ambassador of Israel to the United States. The home of the ambassador of Israel to the United States. The home of Israel ambassador. We are here to say you cannot have a peaceful morning. We will not allow you to have a peaceful morning when a genocide is ongoing. Rise and shine! Rise and shine! Rise and shine! This is the house of the ambassador of Israel to the United States. And we are giving him a good morning welcome. We are at all entrances. We have our ready to go. The home of the Israeli ambassador, for those that are tuning in to the U.S. We have a shit ton of sound machines.
So you call, we just learned the term you use. It's called a blood dump. You've also done a blood dump at Raytheon, and we can take a quick look at that too, and then you can tell us about what's the message you're trying to send here as well. So that's Raytheon is the weapons maker, and so you're hitting the U.S. officials, the White House staff, the Israeli ambassador's home, and the weapons makers like Raytheon. I have a question. Do you take requests? Can I send you a list of? Because I'd like to see a blood dump at the German embassy. Can that be arranged? Am I allowed to take requests?
It's funny. We actually have done quite a bit of stuff that is not yet not public.
Okay, all right.
We've done them at all the weapons manufacturers, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Systems, Boeing, Raytheon. Interestingly enough, also a lot of these weapons companies have no signage. We've done it at AIPAC. There's not a single sign in front of the American Public Affairs Council that has any signs. We did what we call dirty money, where we threw fake money in the air and started spraying blood all over it, blood water. We also have done them in front of Facebook and Meta, their offices in downtown DC, in front of Google, in front of Microsoft, who are all complicit with providing technology to support the apartheid and illegal occupation in both the West Bank and the atrocities in Gaza through spying. And so we have done these and we continue to do them. We do take some requests. We are additionally starting to target more homes in residential neighborhoods. Obviously, there's a bit more trickiness to, the fact that these are very thin roads. And I'm just going to let you see how close our tents are to the main road. This is the main roadway, and you can see huge trucks coming by, and these are our tents where we sleep. And so, we obviously try to make sure that we keep our people safe at all times while doing these actions. And I'm just going to let you, see this. But yes, if we are hopefully going to continue to target additional people. Again, this is the signage. This is his exit of his home, and this is directly what he sees. Bloody Blinken, Secretary of Genocide. All of our signage around, the genocide that's happening, and making sure people know, and we expose this, and the signs go on both sides of the road. I don't know if you can see those, but yes.
And that's amazing. The signs are incredible. And I'm seeing in the comments now on our live stream, some people in the DC area saying, I want to come down and join the protest. Can people do that?
Yeah, we encourage people to come out specifically from 7 to 9 a.m. and 7 to 9 p.m., which is when they're home. We know from Blinken in a recent interview that he did, that he says since he's home a lot, He's away a lot, that he tries to use breakfast time as sacred time. We want to make sure that his children hear us and ask the question, Daddy, why are they calling you Bloody Blinken? Because that's what I envision. They probably ask every time their car comes by us and I say, your father is a murderer of babies, baby murderer, baby murderer. And we know it's impacting them because they put up, they put up towels on the windows of the cars of the children, which just happened recently, actually, a couple of days ago. But yes, people are more than welcome to come join us in the evenings and during the day. We do have pretty strict kind of rules and around the use of things so we don't get shut down. But we encourage and welcome folks that are willing to come. And again, we push the boundary of legal protest and staying within the our constitutional rights and what's legally available to us. And that's how we've been able to continue to do this.
And you want people, and you also want people to stick to the basic message. What is that
Correct.
message? What are the
Correct.
slogans that you're
so we're really anchored right now in the ceasefire first and foremost, but frankly, a ceasefire should have happened 1, 2, 3 weeks in. At this point, when you've destroyed a huge majority of the living situation in Gaza, ceasefire now seems increasingly obsolete, although we want the atrocities to end. We want the violence and bombing to end. We also are asking Blinken to stop unconditional aid to Israel, to do a human rights audit on Israel, to exercise and look into the Leahy law and the application of violations of human rights and how countries are not supposed to be eligible to receive aid under our legal system if they commit atrocities and war crimes. None of that audit is happening, so that's also a pressure point for us. And then also acknowledging state-sponsored violence of Israel. We would like Blinken to acknowledge, and the administration to acknowledge, mass atrocities are being committed. Right now, we've only heard Blinken repeatedly say that my heart is with the people of Gaza, while simultaneously providing tons of weapons and bypassing Congress to provide additional weapons to Gaza. So we are tired of the hypocrisy. We want an acknowledgement of the violence that is being committed. We want an acknowledgement of the United States' role in that. Whether or not we're going to get it, we will continue to keep the pressure up until hopefully the relationship changes and enough Americans are awakened to call to take action. And I want to just add also, to date, we have given also 23,000 flyers out all around DC that talk about what is happening on the ground, with links to resources and information, calls to action, and just kind of an overview of what's happening. We fly our cars. We attend, over the holidays, we attended Christmas markets and handed these out to strangers. We're trying to meet people where they are outside of the echo chambers of social media, which we know curates content based on what you're already interested in. And so that's why it's extremely important for us to meet people where they're at, to flyer, to advocate, to be in the streets. We have a lot of cars stop here and ask us questions. What is happening? Whose house is this? Why are you here? That is an opportunity to educate more people, to realize that their tax dollars are being used to do this. No one's an innocent bystander if you are an American taxpayer, and everyone has a role to play. And we saw that type of pressure work during the Vietnam War, during segregation, during apartheid in South Africa, and that's what pressure we're trying to build.
Hazami Barmada, thank you so much for joining us from outside of Blinken's fortress there in the DC area. We would love to have you back on and follow these protests. Hopefully you won't have to be doing it much longer. Hopefully a just ceasefire and an end to this genocide and a lasting just resolution will happen soon. So thank you so much for all that you're doing and for being with us on the EI live stream.
Thank you so much, and please give our greetings and thanks to all of your comrades there. We really appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Wow. Well, that was a mood lifter.
I mean, it's really, I just have to say, when I saw some of those clips circulating, it just made me feel like, I've taken part in protests before, and it is very empowering. I remember during back in 2009, after Operation, or 2010, it was a few months after Operation Cast Lead, so-called, one of the first big massacres. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐿, the Israeli prime minister, came to the University of Chicago, and I took part with several dozen people in a protest and disruption. We got up one by one, and we made it impossible for him to speak. And it felt so empowering that they are confronted with their crimes. And I see people saying, they're psychopaths, they don't care. And I think a lot of them probably are psychopaths. But I still think that confronting them with their crimes is important. It's what we can do. And I just found those videos to be so powerful. And other people see them. They circulate around the world. And it's so important that they are not insulated from the reality of their crimes.
That's right. Yeah, that there are consequences for their crimes, and that they should not know peace. When they are helping carry out a genocide. Ali, speaking of consequences, you wrote a couple of pieces very recently about the economic consequences that businesses who are either Israeli owned or do business with Israel are facing because of public revulsion around the world to Israel's genocide. Can you give us a sense of what's happening, for example, with let's see, the Japanese corporation 𝐓𝐡𝐞 taking a decision to end its partnership with the Israeli weapons maker 𝐓𝐡𝐞 by the end of this month.
Yeah, so we can start there. There's actually a lot to talk about, but let's start with 𝐓𝐡𝐞. This is one of these Japanese firms that most of us have never heard of, but it is a conglomerate that is involved in everything from textiles to consumer goods to mining to aviation, and probably owns a lot of companies and brands we have heard of. So this is a huge company. And they announced just this week that they are ending an agreement with Elbit Systems, which is Israel's largest private weapons manufacturer, and which has made many of the weapons that Israel is using now in its genocide in Gaza. And Tsuyoshi Hachimura, the chief financial officer at 𝐓𝐡𝐞, said that the partnership with Elbit was, quote, based on a request from Japan's defense ministry for the purpose of importing defense equipment for the self-defense forces of Japan, necessary for Japan's security, and is not in any way related to the current conflict between Israel and Palestine. In other words, their agreement pre-existed the genocide. It was actually an agreement signed in March of last year. And at the time it was signed, the Israeli ambassador hailed it as evidence of, quote, deepening relations between Israel and Japan, relations that are based on mutual interests and shared values, end quote. But the decision to end the relationship taken by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 clearly is related to the genocide in Gaza. And this is what Tsuyoshi Hachimura of the company said. He said, quote, taking into consideration the International Court of Justice's order on 26 January and that the Japanese government supports the role of the court, we have already suspended new activities related to the Memorandum of Understanding with Elbit and plan to end the Memorandum of Understanding by the end of February. So that's extremely significant.
It is. What do you like, after the International Court of Justice's ruling, the significance of a major corporation not wanting to be implied in the complicity with genocide. I mean, do you think that other corporations will follow suit? Sometimes it just takes one for a domino effect.
Well, it's already happening, and it's not just corporations, because the other announcement this week was that the government of Wallonia, which is one of Belgium's 3 federal regions, suspended arms export licenses to Israel, and it also explicitly cited the ICJ decision, which, as people will recall, ordered preventive measures based on its finding that Israel is plausibly accused of genocide. And I think that it's one thing for people to be critical of Israel, but when you have the world's highest court coming and saying, we think that there may well be genocide here, now all of a sudden people are saying, well, what are the legal consequences for me or for my company? And I don't want to be mixed up in genocide.
Right.
So there is also a history. I think there's a context here, which is that key rulings from the International Court of Justice in the case of Namibia, and this is going back now to the early and mid 1970s, and South Africa's apartheid had that effect. Those rulings, even though, as we've said, that the International Court of Justice by itself cannot enforce its rulings. They don't have a world police force that can go out. These rulings nonetheless have a significant impact because they place a legal responsibility on others. If you'll remember, Nora, when we spoke to legal experts Susan Akram and Michael Link about the ICJ ruling, they both predicted that these sorts of decisions would start to follow.
Right.
We also saw this week the foreign minister of Spain, actually just yesterday, told Al Jazeera that that Spain has had frozen arms exports to Israel actually since October 7th. So we see governments starting to do this. Is it enough? Absolutely not. Oh, another victory is that announced by Palestine Action. That's the direct action group in the UK, and we've spoken to them on the Electronic Intifada live stream. They announced that they were notified by Kuehne and Nagel, which is a major Swiss-based international shipping and logistics company, that it had also ended its contract with 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Systems and will not be working with the Israeli weapons maker again. And this followed a number of actions by Palestine Action activists at various Kuehne and Nagel offices and properties around the UK, which involved smashing windows, spray painting the inside, breaking into their offices. That's from Palestine Action's press release. And as we know, Palestine Action has been doing these sorts of activities for years, targeting 𝐓𝐡𝐞 Systems, and repeatedly its activists have been criminally prosecuted by authorities in the UK for damaging property and breaking and entering and so on, and have been acquitted because they've successfully argued in court that their actions are to prevent a greater crime of genocide. And so this shows, relating back to our conversation with Hazami, that this kind of direct action, of course, people are making decisions about staying on, which side of the law they're on. And Palestine Action has shown that they are on the right side of the law with these actions, as the acquittals have shown, that they actually do have an impact. So we're seeing governments now, corporations taking these actions, but let's remember that it is at the grassroots that these things start. It is with protest, with solidarity, with boycotts and direct action. And we'll get to more of that in a second, but go on, Asa, sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to make the point about this Japanese conglomerate, which I also had not heard of, but it is this massively important global conglomerate. It's I read it's in the Fortune 500. 𝐓𝐡𝐞. There's 2 points to me about the significance of this. Is first of all, as you mentioned, the impact of the ICJ ruling. Like, we see that already, and we mentioned when we've had these discussions before about the impact of the ICJ ruling, that Israel is plausibly that South Africa has a plausible case that Israel is carrying out a genocide in the Gaza Strip, and that Israel must stop those actions. There were people, understandably, who got frustrated with the ICJ that it didn't explicitly use the word ceasefire. Although, I mean, really, the implication of the only, as the South Africans said afterwards, the only way the ruling can be implemented is through a ceasefire. But we're starting to see the material benefits of that ruling, already in these examples you've laid out there and in your new article. I think it's really important. And this is, I mean, we've all been reporting, all three of us have been reporting on the BDS movement for many, many years. And, especially since the Palestinian call for BDS in 2005. And I mean, I don't know about you two, but I can't remember a time ever. I mean, there may be one that I can't recall, but I can't remember a time ever when there's been a BDS. I mean, there's so many BDS victories we've reported on over the years, but I can't remember a single time when one of these corporations explicitly said, yeah, this is about Israel. This is about these issues. This is a result of what is happening to the Palestinians. And they're not even, even this, they're not necessarily doing it in a particularly moral way, but they are explicitly confirming it is because of this, and that protest does make a difference. Because normally they try and get out of it and say, well, it had nothing to do. Sometimes they've explicitly said the opposite. Oh, it had nothing to do with the protesters.
Right,
it was
just a contract issue. Yeah.
Even when we know it did. Yeah.
Right,
Even when we know it did.
Even though we know that in reality it did. But I can't remember this ever happening before where they've explicitly said, yeah, this is because of, we support the Japanese government supports the work of the ICJ, of the World Court.
Yeah.
That's such a good point, Asa. I mean, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, or BDS activists have always said, it's nice when companies acknowledge that they're leaving Israel or boycotting Israel or ending business in Israel. And there have been big companies that have done that as a result of campaigns. Conglomerates like Veolia, Orange, the big mobile communications firm, and others that have left Israel over the years precisely because of activism. But as you've said, Asa, they don't say it's because of that activism. And the response of BDS organizers has always been, well, it doesn't really matter as long as they leave. We know why they left. They know why they left. But I do agree, it takes it to another level when you have companies like this saying, yeah, it's because of the ICJ decision. And so it may well be that we're entering a new phase where things will accelerate. And I certainly hope so in terms of this kind of action.
Ali, you also wrote about a kind of a ad hoc consumer boycott against McDonald's, and how a major, I think it was the CEO that had to admit that its profits were being dented.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting story because McDonald's Corporation, and we all know who McDonald's is, they held their quarterly sales call, or their quarterly call with investors earlier this week. And they acknowledged that they have suffered a significant loss of sales in the Middle East since the start of the genocide in Gaza, and not just in the Middle East. They were quite explicit in saying that it's much broader than that, and it's particularly in places where there are large Muslim consumer markets, including, and they cited specifically, Malaysia and Indonesia. Indonesia, of course, is the world's most populous Muslim majority country. But they also say, and this is, I'm quoting Chris Kempczinski, the CEO of McDonald's, he says, in a country, for example, like France, that has a larger Muslim population, we are seeing some impact. And he noted that in France, the drop in sales quotes, depends very much on where the restaurant is located and if it's in a Muslim area. And that's very significant because it shows really the power of Muslim communities, not just in their own countries, but also in Europe and North America. And it's maybe a topic for another day, but in the United States now we see Muslim organizations and communities organizing against Biden to deny him the vote in the in the upcoming U.S. elections. But this shows that it has a real impact. And while McDonald's wouldn't put a dollar figure on it, they were very explicit that it is a significant impact on their profits across the region. And they said that they didn't expect things to get better until the war ends.
Right.
And yeah.
Sorry, and I just want to point out the reason why people have been boycotting McDonald's. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is on a number of levels. Let's say there's McDonald's specific issues, and then I think there's a broader response. The McDonald's specific issues is, as many people may know, McDonald's business model is franchising. The vast majority of McDonald's restaurants you see are not owned and operated by McDonald's Corporation. They're owned and operated by franchisees who have to invest a lot of their own money to buy and set up these restaurants. And then they share the profits with McDonald's. They pay royalties to McDonald's. And so that's how the company makes most of its money. So in Israel, the McDonald's Israel franchise, after October 7th, announced that they were giving away thousands of free meals to the Israeli soldiers taking part in the genocide in Gaza. And this produced a huge backlash across the region, in Arab countries and in Turkey in particular. And some of the McDonald's franchises in those countries tried to counter it by distancing themselves from what McDonald's Israel had done. And some of them even announced that they were giving sums of money in support of humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza. But it didn't work because people, and you hear this argument. I'll say more about this, but I just came back a couple of days ago from Jordan, and the argument you hear sometimes from business people is, well, yes, it's McDonald's, but it's locally owned and operated, and the employees are local people, so we shouldn't punish them. But people didn't buy that, and McDonald's had to admit that it has suffered a significant business impact. Again, not just in the Middle East, not just in Malaysia and Indonesia, but in other countries where there are significant Muslim populations, showing their consumer power. And the other company that's been affected, that admitted it's been affected, is Starbucks. Again, another iconic brand name. And they had to admit that they've taken a hit. They claim to be, neutral. They say we have no political agenda. But in fact, what happened a few weeks ago was that the Starbucks Workers Union put out a tweet in support of Palestinian rights, and the Starbucks Corporation repudiated it and actually sued the union for infringing on its trademark, because they said the union's logo and name are too similar to Starbucks, and people will confuse their position with Starbucks. But in fact, Starbucks was pandering to right-wing anti-Palestinian media and politicians in the United States who objected to the tweet by the Starbucks Workers Union. So far from being neutral, Starbucks was actually rejecting support for Palestinian rights and trying to appease the right wing. What it actually did was it enraged everyone, and as a result of boycotts by supporters of Palestinian rights and by opponents of Palestinian rights, it saw a measurable drop in its business and revenues. But I think there's a bigger picture here. So you can point at those specifics related to McDonald's and Starbucks, but I think what's mostly driving this is a general revulsion at the role of the United States and the West. And this kind of consumer boycott is one of the few direct ways people have of making decisions which they see as supporting Palestinian rights and punishing the countries or governments or corporations they see as responsible. So when I was in Jordan, and I just came back a few days ago to the United States, it's very apparent that boycotting McDonald's, and not just McDonald's, but pretty much every major American brand and some European brands like Carrefour, the supermarket chain, and Nescafe, is now a cultural norm, to the extent that, you know, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, which were extremely popular in Jordan, you don't see them at restaurants anymore. People are now serving local alternatives or other brands which are not in the public mind associated with the United States. And that's become the norm. If you were to walk around with a Coca-Cola, people would be upset at you. And you'll hear people saying, oh, yeah, you know, that you drive past McDonald's and it's empty, and that's very satisfying to them. So I think this is part of a bigger phenomenon that is not necessarily about the specifics of those countries, but just a general rejection of these brands and saying, you know, we want to make known to the United States that there is a price, there are consequences for your role in this genocide.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, Ali, for giving us those reports. And of course, we're going to continue to follow the consumer boycotts and the divestment, maneuvers by major corporations, and of course sanctions. I mean, it's quite a time for people to be able to move the boycott movement like they've been doing recently. Incredible. Okay, so we're gonna turn to Jon now for his analysis of the Palestinian resistance and their maneuvers. And then we're gonna have a discussion afterwards about the possible ceasefire and any news related to political negotiations. Hello, Jon. What's been happening on the ground in Gaza while all of this has been going on?
Hey guys, yeah, well, we're moving forward on the ceasefire talks, but the war on the Palestinian civilian population has continued unabated. We're seeing the same level of airstrikes and targeting of civilians that hasn't tapered off at all. The Israelis are not, the Israeli troops are not as deep into territory as they have been in recent weeks, but the airstrikes are continuing and killing 150 people a day, still targeting hospitals, still dismantling the civic infrastructure of the Gaza Strip, while showing very few significant military gains to justify this brutal genocide that we've been watching now entering its 5th month. So Maureen reported, and you reported, Nora, earlier on in the show about some of the satellite imagery that's come out from the Gaza Strip that we're going to show you here to give people a sense of what it looks like when we're talking about 35,000 airstrikes, hundreds of thousands of tank shells, targeting the civilian infrastructure in the Gaza Strip as a response to the October 7th military assault, which collapsed the Gaza division and cast the Israeli security establishment into disrepute within the society in Israel. And so what we're seeing is the Israeli military taking it out on the civilian population in the Gaza Strip as an attempt to sort of re-burnish their reputation within their society. And so what we're looking at there is a map of Gaza from the north to the south. And largely what we're seeing there is targeting, this is satellite data from the 17th of January. So it's actually 2 weeks old. It's from the middle of January. And so it's been added to in this time. But maybe we can scroll through some of this, Tamara, and see what it is that we're looking at, because the Guardian has taken some of this satellite imagery that was available and sort of dug down into what we're looking at for the total destruction of the Gaza Strip. More than 200,000 housing units destroyed. And so we've seen this kind of destruction in various ways. But to see it overall on these maps is really astonishing. And it's coupled with Israeli videos of their demolitions. And so what we're seeing is a comprehensive attack, a systematic dismantling of civilian life in the Gaza Strip. And we know that that doesn't match Israeli estimates of the dismantling. What they're saying is the dismantling of the Qassam brigades and Hamas in Gaza, where Israeli and American intelligence estimates put the degrading of the fighting force and the tunnel apparatus in the Gaza Strip at less than 25%. But what we're looking at here is almost total destruction of the civilian population, 80% in the north of buildings destroyed. And you can see just in this kind of imagery, each and every one of these is a house, is a family. These are apartment towers that you're looking at right there, 20-story buildings with hundreds of families living in one building, completely erased. And so this is in the north. And if we move down, it's targeting, of course, started in the north, and then the attack moved down to Gaza City. And you can see the areas here in the center of Gaza moving towards Gaza City. And largely we're looking at the built up areas, because as we've talked about a number of times, if you just look at that total destruction, and what we've talked about on this show a number of times is that the Gaza Strip has built up densely populated areas, and around it are farmlands in the areas that used to be Israeli settlements. So even the areas that we aren't seeing in red in the zoomed out maps are actually farmland and not civilian buildings. Like this area of showing the area of Jabalia to Gaza City, just total destruction. And that's what Israel has been doing, not a targeted military operation, but a genocide against the population where the red blots cover the entire area. Again, this is satellite imagery from the middle of January of bomb damage from Israeli airstrikes, just totally covering the entire area. And the Israeli Defense Ministry the other day bragged about how they have received 250 cargo planes worth of weapons and material from the United States, more than 20 container ships full of weapons, totaling more than 10,000 tons. These are American weapons shipped to Israel throughout this 124 days at a rate of 2 cargo planes a day. Unloading this equipment and then having it be dropped on the Palestinian population in the Gaza Strip. And we've seen the Israelis do this through their TikTok videos that we also learned this week from a report from Haaretz, that it's the Israeli Operations Directorate that is behind these TikTok videos that are released. One channel in particular that is very popular within Israel, which shows torture, gore, and destruction, and that has been a military that came from the Israeli military, which we of course knew all along. It came from the Israeli military. We saw them stage the mass arrests, and force Palestinian civilians to walk towards them with guns that they said that they had, which they clearly didn't have. And then these social media videos get disseminated throughout Israeli society. And they're coming from the Israeli army. This is a goal of the Israeli army, to create this destruction and to show that to their population that that's what they're doing. Not targeting Qassam, not destroying the militants, but targeting the civilian population, humiliating them, arresting them, stripping them naked, torturing them, destroying the entire infrastructure of the Gaza Strip, the schools, the hospitals. That's the only thing that's been systemically targeted. There's no sign in any of the Israeli military reporting of anything like the 10,000 fighters that they said have been killed by the Israeli military, according to Israeli numbers, which is more than the total number of men killed in the Gaza Strip, because we know, as you said at the beginning of the show, Nora, that 75% of the targets of this war have been women and children. And so even the Israeli numbers of what they say are dismantling the Qassam brigades are just clearly not true. And the New York Times, actually, for the first time, 120 odd days into the war, for the first time reported on the way that these TikTok videos have been disseminated within Israeli society, despite the fact that this has been going on. And you can see here in this grid map that Tamara is showing us, these are the mines that the Israelis have laid, and these buildings, and blown them up, entire neighborhoods that we're seeing examples of, neighborhood after neighborhood just flattened for no military purpose. Later on in this file, we see Israeli soldiers blowing up a neighborhood, and they're saying on the camera that we're blowing up 21 houses in honor, whatever you want to call it, for the 21 soldiers who were killed in Maghazi when they were laying that. Let's show the clip here. So we're going to destroy 21 houses in the terrace for the memory of the soldiers that were killed. So you're seeing absolutely no military purpose to what's going on. The original Maghazi attack was to destroy 10 houses in the middle camps area. And here we have soldiers saying they're destroying 21 houses in the Khan Yunis area as revenge. This is a revenge operation that the Israelis are carrying out. And despite their claims that they're dismantling Hamas in the Gaza Strip, their own intelligence shows that that Hamas has reconstituted itself in the areas which we reported on right from the beginning, when Israel said that they had absolute control over the north. And it was obvious months ago that they didn't have that. It's even more obvious now when their forces have had to reinvade Gaza City in order to try to have some sort of, that's Isra University that we're watching there, just be vaporized. All 7 universities in the Gaza Strip have been destroyed. And we've seen Israeli soldiers stand in front of these demolitions and say things like, oh, now there's not any more engineers in the Gaza Strip because they destroyed these universities. And so you can see clearly the intent, and I guess that's what the ICJ was dealing with here, is because normally in genocide, the intent is the difficult thing to prove. For the Israelis, the intent is the easiest thing to prove because there's absolutely no military objective to vaporizing these neighborhoods. They're trying to make the Gaza Strip unlivable for the civilian population. And in these videos that we haven't showed for this war, I haven't showed these videos because I think they're disgusting and appalling. You can see them on social media, and here they're cheering. The soldiers are cheering for this destruction of a civilian neighborhood. So maybe we can go to number 9, Tamara, because in Khan Yunis the other day, while the Israelis were demolishing, this is the poorest people in the Gaza Strip, people living in makeshift huts in Khan Yunis. And here comes a D9 bulldozer flattening its way for no military purpose through the poorest people in the Gaza Strip's homes. And he emerges here in his bulldozer with pieces of the family's homes all over the bulldozer. And there's a Qassam fighter waiting for him right there. And the shot hits the cage of the vehicle, a direct hit on the bulldozer that's demolishing these houses. What we're looking at for the listening audience is ramshackle houses made of corrugated metal and sheets. And we have a bulldozer, an armored bulldozer provided by Caterpillar, speaking of boycott.
Which is in Illinois, just a few miles away.
The United States Caterpillar company here.
Yeah.
And then you can see this fighter, literally two fighters, because we have a cameraman and a shooter, standing right in front of the vehicle, the D9 armored bulldozer, and then escaping back to their base through the tunnels. So I just wanted to show that one video.
How do you think the bulldozer crew came out of that?
That is for sure 2 fatalities. There's no question. You can see the weapon, which is an 85 millimeter tandem charge. You can see it detonate twice, once inside the cab. And so Israel did acknowledge 2 killed in Khan Yunis this week. But as we've reported a number of times on this program, Israel's not being forthcoming with their casualties. And despite the fact that they said that they were going to report every day on their casualties, they haven't been doing that in the new year. And they're doing it largely to cover up these kind of morale. They're trying to keep the morale in their forces up long enough to destroy the civilian
John, when the Israelis do announce deaths like this, they say that these soldiers died in combat defending Israel. Does that look like combat to you?
No, this is, I can't stress enough that this is the poorest section of the Gaza Strip. The most impoverished people who are living here with corrugated metal housing. And you have an Israeli military that decided one morning that the target of their day's operations are going to be to flatten this makeshift camp. And honestly, that video is one of the most just straightforward street justice videos that we've seen in this war. The way that bulldozer has people's homes hanging off of it at the moment it's struck by the Palestinian fighters. I just wanted to show that in context of these destruction, of the satellite imagery of destruction, which makes it difficult because when we show the satellite imagery, it's all splotched with red. And it's hard to understand what we're looking at with the totality of the destruction. But this video here shows you what it looks like. This is one of the ways that they demolish houses. They demolish them sometimes with bulldozers, brick by brick, and they show videos of it. They showed one the other day where they lifted the chair out of the house and put it to the side while they slowly recorded a TikTok video destroying a house that has no military objective. We watched them blow up that university, Isra University. No military objective. In fact, the schools that the Israelis are blowing up, the United Nations schools and the universities, were used by the Israelis as military bases. So we know that there's actually no tunnels in those schools because the Israelis use them as a base. We know that they're not being used by the Qassam brigades because the Israelis are using them as a base. And then when they leave and withdraw, which they're doing right now, in large numbers withdrawing from the Gaza Strip, they destroy as they're leaving. And so we will show more of those coming up. But when we're talking about the ceasefire and what Israel's trying to accomplish, I just always want to start these resistance videos by showing that the target of this war is civilians. And we've reported on it for 4 full months now. But I just wanted to start off with that. And we'll get into some resistance videos. This is from the middle camps area of the Gaza Strip. This is the Barej Battalion. And we watched this video a few weeks ago. Qassam released this video. This is a fighter with a Yasin approaching a Namr troop carrier that has 12 soldiers in it and hitting it at the front where the engine is and where the controls are for this vehicle. This video cut off here in the original video that the Qassam Brigade's shown. But you can see in this extended clip that the fighters are firing on the troop carrier to prevent the evacuation. And as the fighter that we watched fire the Yasin is walking away, he says, "This is revenge for my family." God willing. This is revenge for my family. And the other fighter says, yeah, man. And we didn't see that in the first original video, but 𝐤𝐿 released this extended cut of this. And I want to just point this out because, and I have been throughout this war, of the way that these fighters are honoring both their community that they're living in, but also the fighters that came before them. And this is a fighter very clearly saying, this is revenge for my family, which is part of the war. And we'll talk about it more in the ceasefire conversations next. But one of the things that one of the officials at the ceasefire said was that 𝐤𝐿 wanted to have a ceasefire because we're killing their families. That was from a participant in the ceasefire meetings, tacitly admitting that the targets of this war are the families of the fighters, and less the fighters themselves. And so that's the video from the Barej Battalion. We saw a couple videos previously from the Barej Battalion where they gave shout outs to their military leadership who are from the middle camps. And we saw the one from Shujaiya where the fighters left a message in the house that said, from this home, we destroyed 3 armored vehicles. So Palestinians going back to their homes and finding these messages. And we're going to see more and more of that as Palestinians do go home, which they will do from this displacement. We're going to see these kind of messages from the resistance. So, and this is another message, number 2, Tamara, here. This is in Maghazi camp. These are fighters, again, moving through the buffer zone freely here and coming out. And we're going to see a fighter with a Yasin made in the Gaza Strip, with the munition used from unexploded Israeli bombs and repurposed, put into these weapons and fired back at the Israelis. So that's a shot that we just saw hitting the back door of the tank, which is the weakest spot. Now we're seeing a fighter fire a Yasin from an elevated position, which effectively acts like an air force, shooting the tank from an angle that they're not equipped to handle, as well as the down below shots. And so we see here a fighter being instructed by a commander. That's an armored bulldozer and a Merkava tank. And the commander says to the fighter, he says, let's put this one on the table of the war cabinet during these ceasefire negotiations. We're also seeing here tactical vests that we're seeing that we haven't seen very much of in this fight, suggesting that there's still significant fighting elements of the 𝐤𝐿 brigades that haven't entered this fight yet, which is the same in 2006 when Hezbollah defeated the Israelis without their most significant units even entering the battle. And so this is, again, the middle camps. This is the middle camps brigade, the Barrage Battalion, that we've shown a number of times, because the resistance in the middle camps has been fierce throughout this war. And then let's do number 3 here, Tamara. This is in Tel Aviv. This is a fighter. He picks up his Yasin and he says, this one's for Sheikh Salah Aruri, who we reported on was assassinated in Beirut, the leader of the 𝐤𝐿 brigades in the West Bank, who was assassinated by Israel. And so you see a fighter here hitting a D9 armored bulldozer with his Yasin, saying, this is for, he says, the direct translation is, this is for the eyes of Sheikh Salah. So like an eye for an eye, the revenge. And so these fighters, while they're fighting with skill, well-trained, well-disciplined fighters, they're also throwing in these little nuggets of respect for the fighters that came before them, of acknowledging their communities during this fight. Now we're watching a video.
And if I could just say, John, it's also a reminder, because I heard Blinken say this. We'll talk more about Blinken again. But in the press conference yesterday in Qatar, he said again, and this is something American officials often say, that the October 7th attacks, that Hamas, that has nothing to do with the Palestinian people. Of course, they're disingenuous because they are full participants in this genocide against the Palestinian people. But they try to make this rhetorical separation between Hamas and the resistance in general on the one hand, and the Palestinian people on the other. And what these fighters are constantly reminding us is that they are the sons, the husbands, the fathers of communities that support them, just the way the Vietnamese people supported their resistance, the way South Africans supported their resistance, the way people in every situation support their men and women of the resistance. And I just think that's an important point to make, that these resistance fighters are not, as Blinken and others would like us to believe, monsters or space aliens who dropped from the sky and have nothing to do with this society. They're defending their community. They're defending their country. They're giving their lives in a cause that they believe in and that we believe in. And it has to be said, and that billions of people in the world believe in. This resistance is legitimate, and they're fighting for a just cause. And they're reminding us of that, and they are rebuking the likes of Blinken, who try to demonize and dehumanize them as so-called terrorists, when we can all see what they're doing here. They are fighting a monstrous US-backed army that is murdering children and elderly and destroying universities and homes for no reason. And that point can't be made enough, because we also get this kind of liberal talking point constantly that you have to condemn the resistance if you're going to criticize Israel. And I just think enough of that.
Yes, we don't condemn the resistance, that's for sure, on this show. So the Israelis have had to effectively re-invade the Gaza City area of Gaza, because it's been very clear to everybody that Hamas was not dismantled, neither Qassam brigades, the military wing, but also the municipal services. The civil defense is still operating, digging people out of the rubble. The first thing that the Palestinians did when the Israelis withdrew from Gaza City was try to rehabilitate. I'm not even sure what the word you use when these hospitals have been dismantled like this, but to try to rehabilitate Shifa Hospital. The civil defense, the municipal services, the policing in the north still exists, as do the fighters, in such a way that we're able to see these videos responding to claims that we hear in the media, that the Qassam brigades are able to respond and communicate with us through these videos, that the resistance has been able to continue in the north, that we've reported on the whole time, but also that the civilian services, the governance of Hamas, which is also part of the people, is still intact. And part of the ceasefire negotiations are to address that, the fact that Hamas is still able to carry out these municipal services despite the blockade, the starvation, the man-made starvation in the Gaza Strip. That Israel's military objectives haven't been reached even in a modicum, even by their own numbers. They're saying that more than 80% of the tunnel network is still intact, and they were using that number, 80%, based on 350 miles of tunnels. But the Israelis are saying now that they believe there's 450 miles of tunnels. So you're talking about in excess of 80% from the Israelis' own numbers. And I'm sure as soon as the war's over, Qassam will tell us what percentage of the tunnels are still intact. But this is the attack on the IDF's attack on Gaza City. They said, we're concentrating our efforts on Hamas's attempts to rehabilitate in the north. All police stations were attacked. That's what they said the other day. So they're not attacking the military of Qassam. They're attacking the civilian police force. And so we could just see with all of these examples that the civilians are the target of this. So let's do number 4 here tomorrow. We can see in Gaza City, where it took 3 divisions of the IDF to take originally to move into Gaza City. Here we see fighters from the Qassam brigades moving through the city, passing their Yassins in order to get between buildings that have been, the walls have been blown out of by the Israelis, in order to reach this Merkava 4 Israeli tank from above, which is they were down on the ground floor, and we watched in the video as they climbed up to get an elevated shooting position, and showing their fighters both with the camera. And here we're seeing the burning tank, where some people have asked what the impact is of these Yassins hitting these tanks. And we don't see it, as I talked about last show, because the fighters are disciplined and well trained in order to fire and then get out of the way before return fire happens. So we often don't see the tank destruction, but there we see there a brand new 75-ton Israeli tank burning, being hit by a Palestinian-made Yassin warhead that's used, that's created from Israeli bombs that that didn't explode, that are dropped. And we know that those are all over the Gaza Strip right now. And so after this generation of warfare, maybe we can pause it right here tomorrow. Look at this shot right there to give you a sense right there of that. Again, I talked about it last week, but that's just military vandalism. To leave a building intact like that, but to blow out its walls, you're not serving any military purpose for the IDF. You're actually just giving Palestinian fighters a high point from which to fire down on the Israeli vehicles from. And that's what we're seeing. This is a home destroyed for a Palestinian family, but not a military objective for the Israelis. So we're seeing that the ability in Gaza City for the fighters to move around the city still, we're still seeing them choose the weapons that are appropriate for the situation. We're not seeing anything that looks like running out of weaponry now entering the 5th month of this war. Qassam themselves have admitted to firing, to striking, to using more than 1,000 Yassins so far in this war. And so that's a shot from Gaza City, just to give people a sense of what's happening in Gaza City. Maybe we can go to number 5 now tomorrow. Again, using the rubble, moving through these destroyed buildings in order to stay off of the street. And this is an excavator that's being hit. So it's not as armored, as up-armored as the tanks are. And so we see him, Qassam fighter, using an appropriate warhead for that vehicle. Now we're seeing a second one from an elevated height, using a different warhead. This is a third shot of a fighter moving into the street and hitting a tank from the street. And now we're seeing here is a sniper operation that took place in the Gaza Strip the other day. And the Israelis admitted to this middle officer here being hit. He's a deputy commander of the Shaldag unit, which is an Air Force special operations unit, whose mission is to, quote, deploy undetected into hostile environments. And when we come back around to the sniper, we'll see that that he's definitely detected, because we see a Qassam sniper unit here using an Al-Ghul Palestinian-made sniper rifle. And we're seeing the fighter inside the building use his full weapon is inside the building, unlike the Israelis that we've seen that poke their guns out of the buildings and are seen. We can see this fighter is completely inside the building. He's using books to stabilize himself. He's using sandbags to stabilize himself. And because the Qassam brigades are doing so much reconnaissance, it appears that they're able to determine who the commander in this unit was and target the commander. And we cut off the end of this strip to keep the end of this scene to keep this video online. But the soldier is hit, and the Israelis admitted that the deputy commander was killed. And like you said, Ali, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐿 said that this commander died in a confrontation which that certainly doesn't look like what we're seeing there. But also just to note, Channel 12, the largest TV channel in Israel, pointed out that this commander was responsible for the Shifa operation, where the soldiers went into Shifa hospital, dismantled the hospital, and then took trophy pictures inside the hospital. Channel 12, while celebrating this commander, said that he was in charge of the Shifa hospital operation. So again, we're seeing Palestinians not only existing and operating throughout the north, moving around freely throughout the north, but we see them selecting the target here, and selecting the commander and hitting the commander. So you're seeing Palestinian weapons being used with great skill by Palestinian fighters against targets who are symbolically the people who I believe will go down in history as the people who dismantled Shifa Hospital. I don't think history is going to reflect on Shifa Hospital and the dismantling of the hospitals in the Gaza Strip in the way that they dealt with it in the moment, coming up with excuses that filled the news cycle while Israel was dismantling the hospital. So that's in Gaza City, and that's the Al-Ghul sniper rifle named after the first Qassam Brigade's weapons commander, whose vision for the resistance was to get these weapons into the hands of all of their fighters, rather than having a few amazing weapons, that they would get middle of the road weapons that are usable for into the hands of every fighter. And that's what we're seeing 20 years after Adnan al-Ghul's assassination. We're seeing fighters using these weapons that are made in the Gaza Strip that are able to be used by all different fighters in quantity. And that was the vision of Adnan al-Ghul. And here his rifles being used to snipe the commander of the Shifa hospital operation. Maybe we'll go down into the south now tomorrow, number 6. So I wanted to show people this. This is a field report. This is what we see throughout the day, all day for the 125 days of this war. Qassam puts out, and 𝐄𝐥𝐿 and the other factions as well, put out these very simple field reports. And this field report is 3 lines of Arabic. Translated, it basically says that after returning from the battle lines to their bases, our fighters confirmed that a convoy of Zionist vehicles was ambushed, and our fighters detonated 3 explosive devices previously planted against the tank and targeted another tank with an Al-Yasin 105 shell in the Al-Amal neighborhood of west of Khan Yunis. So that comes across on the social media. They publish that field report. And they've published throughout the course of this war thousands of these field reports. And so we saw this report the other day come out. And then about 6 hours later, after this field report, they showed us video number 6 here tomorrow, where we see a fighter move out into the street, lay presumably a Shawaz explosively formed penetrator into the ground, essentially doing exactly what that field report described. Now we're seeing footage from behind of an Israeli tank pull up in front of the building that we watched the fighter dig the IED. And you see 1, 2, 3, exactly like the field report said. 6 hours later, we get a video from the same day. So clearly the fighter's command and control is intact. And then here's the Yasin part of the field report. So we're getting accurate field reports. They're very Spartan reports, but we can see that in that 3-line field report, they described exactly what's happening in this video that comes a number of hours later. And again, so if that D9 bulldozer that we watched at the beginning, his cab was hit with 2 soldiers in it that were surely killed. There's surely casualties in this footage that we're seeing right now. But it doesn't match any Israeli field reports. It matches the Qassam Brigade's field reports precisely. but not the Israeli field reports. So that's Qassam laying a complex ambush, showing it on video, and it matching the field report, in effect, honestly telling us what's happening on the ground. And we've seen this throughout the war. And I just wanted to show people the way that the field reports are filed. And then occasionally we get videos after, because as the resistance has said throughout this war, their operations are far more than what we see on video. And the videos, while they're an important part of the information operations, they're not shooting these videos at the risk of their fighters. The shooting of the video comes second to the military operation. It's not the primary concern, but it is a concern. And because of these information operations, the Palestinians have been able to show the world courageous and fierce resistance. And it juxtaposes so starkly, as we say every single show, with what the Israelis want to show their people of what they're doing. This is what the Palestinians want to show their people and the people of the world, what they're doing to resist the occupation and genocide that's been happening in Gaza. Maybe we could go to number 7 tomorrow, because here again, we're seeing fighters. I mean, look at this cameraman, first of all, framing that shot through the broken door. But now we're seeing a troop carrier, population 12. There's 12 soldiers in that tank, directly hit from above in the weaker spot of the vehicle. So this is in Khan Yunis, in West Khan Yunis, where the fighting has been, the resistance has been fierce over the last few weeks. Now we're watching fighters use an alleyway. Earlier in the war, we were watching them move out into the street to fire these. Now, later in the war, we're seeing them moving within the alleyways, moving through the buildings a little bit more carefully, because as we know, the Israeli drones are constant in the sky. And so we're seeing the fighters learning and operating more effectively from concealed firing positions, which is what we're seeing in each of these videos that we're watching right now, is Yassin shooters using concealed spaces to fire, which defeats the radar of the active protection system of the Israeli vehicles, which makes these strikes more significant. And again, we're constantly seeing tanks being hit, armored vehicles being hit, and bulldozers being hit. And when we talk about the ceasefire, this is one of the reasons that Israel needs a ceasefire, is that these weaponry, they don't have infinite amounts of these vehicles. We've seen scores of bulldozers destroyed throughout this war. So maybe we can do number 8 tomorrow. This is the first time. This is a night ambush. And we haven't showed any from the night, so I wanted to show people that the resistance is around the clock. But you can see at the beginning of this clip that starts at night, and the fighter says, "There's the soldier, there's the soldiers," and they hit them with what looks like a thermobaric warhead. And so the fighting is happening at night as well. Again, you see fighters here in this next clip moving through close to buildings, staying away from the drones. And here we're going to see 2 fighters targeting the same bulldozer. The first shot with an 85 millimeter, which is a smaller warhead, to penetrate the slat armor, the vertical armor, the slats that the D9 bulldozer has. And so that degrades the armor. And then we're seeing the second fighter come with a Yassin 105 and hit the same bulldozer. So we're seeing now multiple strikes on the same target, and the fighters are exiting freely. And as that field report by Qassam said, they're returning to their bases to report on these. These are not martyrdom missions. The safety of the fighters is the primacy. These are not suicide missions by these fighters. They're attempting to come back and fight another day, which is what's happening all throughout the Gaza Strip, is that these fighters are gaining urban warfare skills that make the next war, the next time Israel attempts a genocide, this is a deterrence for that, because we have now 50,000 fighters in the Gaza Strip who are now 5 months of skilled fighting under their belts, that forces Israel to have negotiations in Paris for a ceasefire that we're seeing. Again, so we're seeing them choose these warheads in a way that suggests that they're not running out of them, because they're using appropriate weapons for the moments, for the circumstances, for the different types of armor. They're using multiple shooters against the same vehicle, which is something that we hadn't seen much before. And then let's just show real quickly, just to wrap up here, Tamara, let's show the drones. Qassam showed this quadcopter that we showed also last show. Look at that quadcopter. It's not even, there's not even a scratch on it, which seems to indicate, and we've seen now, I want to say dozens of these. We've seen many videos of these quadcopters. Some of them are damaged. We've seen some of them that are clearly shot out of the sky. But we can see on that quadcopter that it's pretty clear that the Palestinians are seizing these quadcopters and safely landing them through some sort of technological advance that I'm sure we're going to hear about in the documentaries after, because somebody in the Qassam Air Defense Unit has figured out how to GPS spoof to jam the frequency and then GPS spoof and literally land the drones, presumably into the hand of these fighters, because they're not falling out of the sky. And then we just show the next one quickly, Tamara. This is Saraya Al-Quds showing us, this is Islamic Jihad's armed wing, showing us footage of using the drone and taking out the SIM card, or taking out the SD card right out of the drone. I'm not sure if this is poor OPSEC for Saraya Al-Quds, but they're showing us that they actually get the video out of these quadcopters that the Israelis are using. And then in this video, Saraya Al-Quds is showing the footage from the drone that was collected from the drone. Also, that drone, look, it's not a scratch on it. And if those were to fall out of the sky, the propellers would break off. So it seems pretty clear that the Qassam engineers have figured out a way to hack into these signals and land these safely. And here's Saraya Al-Quds showing the Israeli drone footage, and then using that drone footage for a multi-pronged mortar barrage from 4 different locations that they're showing us here now on video. Their fighters using various sized mortars and targeting the Israeli position using the Israeli drone that they have captured, which is just something that's remarkable to have happening during the intensity of this war, the ferocity and destruction of this war, this genocide, that Palestinians are able to do this and able to show us this as the war is going on, which is something, and this is Saraya Al-Quds showing us the evacuation, the medical evacuation from that mortar barrage. And as I've said on this show before, it's pretty clear that the Palestinians are not targeting the medevac air flights out of Gaza, while the Israelis target Gaza civilians and hospitals. We're seeing the Qassam brigades and the Palestinian resistance targeting military targets and not hitting a medevac helicopter, which we've seen because and even the Israelis have bragged about how these medevacs have come right into what they call the heart of the Gaza Strip, right? Right into the downtown areas, right into the urban.
And we know that they have the capability to target helicopters. They took one down on October 7th, and we know that they've said they've targeted helicopters with SAM missiles.
Yeah, they can hit them with Yassins if they're on the ground, right? So it's pretty clear that they're not doing that. And the Israelis have just this last week praised their one of their medevac units for doing 1,500 medical evacuations from the Gaza Strip, which is incidentally more numbers just from that one unit than the Israelis have said have been injured in the whole ground war. And we know that there's a completely separate unit, an Air Force unit, Unit 669, that itself has carried out more than 1,000 medevacs. So they're either medevacing nobody in these medevac flights, or Israel's covering up their casualties, which I think is pretty clear to everybody. Even in Israel, we're seeing, and we have seen conversations about how they haven't been forthcoming with their civilian casualties. So those are the resistance videos for this week. And just to put to underscore again, every video that you just watched happened since the last time you saw us here. These are all from this week. They clearly show that
there was the one you showed, the longer cut, which
well, they released that this week. They released a longer version where he says that this is revenge for my family. So we're seeing this, the tempo of operations. Abu Ubaidah said the other day that in a 3-day period, the Palestinians hit 43 Israeli armored vehicles in 17 operations and seized 4 drones. And we know last week that they seized 8 drones. So we're talking about dozens of drones that they're taking. And just to put one point on those drones, it appears that those drones are the drones that they're shooting their TikTok videos with, right? So just to add a further underscore that these quadcopters, that the Israelis are actually putting them up in the air in order to show their demolition, to show their population, in an attempt to restore, to burnish the reputation of their Gaza division, of their military writ large, after it was collapsed on October 7th and its soldiers were captured.
Outstanding. Thank you, Jon, for that. And before we end, we wanted to have a discussion about the negotiations for a possible ceasefire that are happening right now. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, Blinken is bouncing around Europe and the Middle East. What do we know about what's happening?
Well, can I just say we wanted to have Jon present that before talking about the ceasefire talks, because I think it's important to root our understanding of these talks in the military reality on the ground. And what we've just seen is that the resistance is continuing to fight, is continuing to land painful blows on the enemy, is continuing to cause major losses to the enemy. And that context is very important, because what happened yesterday in Doha, in Qatar, is that Antony Blinken was there. And as we mentioned earlier, the Qatari foreign minister, of course, Qatar, along with Egypt, has been one of the key mediators between the resistance and Israel and the United States. Israel and the United States being on one side as enemies of the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian resistance being on the other side. And so Qatar said, the foreign minister said that Hamas responded positively to a framework for a ceasefire that was hammered out in Paris by the United States and Qatar and Egypt. And it was interesting that Hamas took its time to respond. They took something like a week. There was sort of anticipation every day. When is Hamas going to respond? Well, they finally responded. The Qatari foreign minister said, they responded positively. They have some reservations that they've sent us, and we're not going to say more because of the sensitivity of the negotiations. But then yesterday, there were a number of interviews and statements and press conferences by various representatives of the resistance factions. I watched an interview with Mohammed al-Hindi, the deputy chief of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and also with Ghazi Hamad, who is one of the leaders of Hamas. And they were very consistent. They said, we won't go into too much detail, but basically our proposals or our response, and by the way, this was a response that came as a unified front from all the resistance factions. So the response Hamas gave was on behalf of all the resistance factions. They said, we stick to our basic principles. And it became clearer what those principles are this morning when details of the Palestinian counteroffer have been revealed in the media. And basically, the Palestinian proposal, just to give a brief outline of it, is for a truce or ceasefire of 3 phases, which with each phase lasting up to 45 days. So a total of 135 days. But they're very clear that at the end of this, they expect a permanent ceasefire. That's part of this phasing, is that there would be negotiations to turn this into a permanent ceasefire. But in the first phase, there would be an exchange of captives, where the elderly captives and the ones who are under 19 years old, I didn't know that there were any left, but apparently there may be, will be released, and the Israelis will release a number of prisoners. There will be a massive flow of aid into Gaza, and the Israelis will relocate out of populated areas in Gaza. In the second phase, we would get to the exchange of Israeli prisoners of war, military prisoners, and more prominent Palestinian prisoners, those with very long sentences or political leaders. There would be the beginnings of reconstruction, a complete withdrawal from Gaza by the Israeli forces. And in the third phase, we would get to things like reconstruction, completely ending the siege on Gaza, and a permanent ceasefire. I may have got some of the elements that belong in one phase, put them into another. But that's just to give you a basic idea of how they think about it. I read the whole proposal, at least the text of what is said to be the proposal, and it looks to me very reasonable, very moderate, very pragmatic, and yet I can't imagine Israel signing on to it. The Israeli leaders are at the same time insisting, Netanyahu and the defense minister Yoav Gallant, that they intend to pursue the war to the very end. Their goals are the complete destruction of Hamas. Netanyahu has talked about imposing a military government on Gaza, that it will be like the West Bank, where the Israelis can go into any community at any time. And they're still talking about that way. And they're also threatening a full-scale invasion of Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza that borders Egypt, and which normally has a population of some 300,000, but now it's closer to 1.5 million because so many people are sheltering there, trying to escape the genocide further north. So it seems to me that the gap between the very moderate and reasonable Palestinian proposals and the extremist position of the Israeli government, at least if we can call it that, because there's so much division and disarray in the Israeli leadership that they don't seem to even have a unified position, and they haven't yet given a formal response to the proposals, although that may come any time with Blinken there today. But I just want to say that the very fact that Israel and the United States are negotiating with Hamas, and Blinken is essentially the mediator, the shuttle between the Hamas leadership and Israel right now, is already a defeat for Israel, because Israel had led us all to believe that within a couple of weeks of the start of the war, they would have already completely destroyed Hamas, eradicated them from the face of the earth. The Biden administration fully supported that role, as did all the European countries and the EU and so on. There was this sort of almost gleeful expectation that Hamas would be eradicated. And here they are, with Hamas taking both the military initiative on the ground, as we've seen, and the political initiative in terms of laying out this detailed proposal. So it's difficult to see. We've had some of our friends and colleagues in Gaza telling us that there's a lot of hope and optimism in Gaza, hope for a ceasefire, but it's very hard to see those gaps being closed, at least if we take at face value what the Israeli leaders are saying. Whether the reality on the ground will dictate a different outcome remains to be seen. But that's where we are for now. I'm curious to hear what Nora, Jon, and Asa think about this.
Yeah, I mean, if a ceasefire proposal is accepted, where are the guarantees that Israel won't, completely violate it? I mean,
yeah, I mean, that's one thing that the resistance leaders have made clear repeatedly and said in various interviews over the last 24 hours, is that there have to be international guarantees that we don't trust Israel, and there's no reason to trust Israel, of course, and that during the week-long truce in November, that Israel violated that, as we saw when they killed civilians or fired at civilians trying to return to their homes, that there have to be international guarantees. So, of course, that would include guarantees from the United States, perhaps from the Europeans, from Turkey, from Egypt, and so on. And that Israel would have to be held to account for abiding by any agreement that is eventually signed.
Yeah.
Well, they wrote the Hamas agreement is written in stages in order that it's honored. So the first stage is essentially releasing the rest of the civilians that could have been released on the first day, but also could have been released in the first exchange. And then there's
but that Israel refused, just to be clear.
Right.
But there's amendments to the first stage that have to be met before the second stage kicks in, and the second stage is the release of the soldiers. So Hamas has built this proposal so that the release of the soldiers doesn't happen before the guarantees that they're asking for, which are essentially the resumption and rehabilitation and reconstruction of Gaza immediately, starting with the hospitals, allowing people to immediately go back home.
And to be provided with temporary housing while the reconstruction goes on. So again, built into the proposal is getting people back to the sites of their original homes immediately, even if they have to live in tents until the reconstruction happens. But again, they built into the proposal to make sure that a prolonged phased process can't result in the permanent displacement of the people in Gaza.
And that's what Israel is trying to do right now. I mean, they're putting mines in all these buildings, like we saw at the beginning of Jon's segment. They're trying to make the Gaza Strip completely uninhabitable before any sort of negotiations take place. I mean, it is relentless and it is sadistic. This is, and it's either bomb everything so that it's completely uninhabitable, or push Palestinians out into Egypt, and both. I mean, that's also their plan. I mean, it's.
But that's clearly not going to happen, which is what we're seeing right now.
Right.
Is that the Mossad and Shabak chiefs were meeting in Paris to essentially approve a broad agreement on a ceasefire, which is what the Israelis need as well. And so the way that the Palestinians have structured this proposal, it's premised upon the reconstruction, allowing that part to begin. They want machinery from civil defense so that people can dig out from the rubble, and they want guarantees that the prisoners will not be rearrested.
Right.
And so they have built all these, itemized all of these things, like restoring the telecommunications, the water, the food aid delivery throughout Gaza, which currently is 1/16 of the needs, to have more than 500 trucks a day. And so they've built that on the civilian, the first stage of the civilian release. And so if these things don't happen, if Israel does violate this agreement, their soldiers will remain in captivity. They will remain captives of the Palestinian resistance, which is the way that they've structured this. To do that is to essentially hold these soldiers. And Israel is on the position where they didn't dismantle the resistance. They didn't dismantle the Hamas government. They didn't return their captives. And so they really have nothing but genocide and destruction to stand on for this 5-month war.
And that policy, remember, of course, Israel may have multiple goals with destruction and genocide. Certainly a clear one that has been expressed by many Israeli officials is ethnic cleansing, the removal of the Palestinian population. And we saw just in the last week or so, what was it, 12 ministers, some large number of government ministers attending this Nuremberg rally type conference calling for the resettlement of Gaza by Jewish settlers. So that's certainly a goal. But the other goal of all the destruction, as we know, the so-called Dahya doctrine, which Israel first implemented in Lebanon in 2006, is that you attack the civilian population, you destroy the infrastructure, you kill the families of the resistance fighters in order to break the resistance and in order to break the bond between the people and the resistance. And that has clearly failed. Right. And so but I do wonder what it looks like for Israeli leaders to climb down from where they are, from these, absolutist and extremist positions, to accept something like this. That seems like reality dictates, military reality dictates that they have to, but it's very hard to see them doing it, given the corner they've painted themselves into.
Yeah,
it's an admission of defeat.
Yeah,
I think that's the $64,000 question right now: is how do they climb down from the position they've painted themselves into? And a small update that while we've been on air, on stream, as it were, some of the news agencies are reporting that Netanyahu has rejected the Hamas counter offer.
Yes.
And it does seem that in a press conference after meeting Blinken, he said that the war will continue until victory. But tomorrow is pointing out that the Israeli war cabinet is meeting tomorrow. So I guess we'll see what happens.
And also Osama Hamdan, a very senior Hamas official, said in his press conference today, which I haven't had a chance to watch yet, I'm just reading a summary, that Netanyahu's remarks on the ceasefire proposal show that he intends to pursue the conflict in the region. But again, I think that if you look at the Hamas proposal in detail, this is a proposal that is intended to bring life back to Gaza, calm and security to the people of Gaza. But a wise Israeli leadership, if one existed, would also see it as something to grab onto, because it would also provide Israel with what it claims it wants, which is calm and peace and security and so on. But it just seems that Israeli leaders are absolutely incapable of that. So I guess the question now is, if that's the position of Netanyahu, is it going to be the position of the United States? Up to this point, the United States has been in lockstep with Israel, despite the fake disagreements that they've had for public consumption, where the U.S. claims that it's putting pressure on Israel while airlifting the bombs around the clock so that Israel can continue the genocide. But then we start getting into discussions about the political calendar in the United States, and how with Biden's approval ratings are at historic lows for his administration, but also at historic lows for a president seeking re-election. I don't have all those numbers at the top of my head, but I read about this recently, that other presidents who were defeated after their first term all had higher approval ratings than Biden. So the politics of this in the United States, where, as we mentioned earlier, we see Muslim and Arab Americans organizing and saying, don't try and scare us with Donald Trump, because there's nothing worse than genocide. And if the Democrats and Joe Biden don't pay a price for genocide, then we will never have any leverage, and we have to be courageous and accept the consequences of making Joe Biden pay a price for this position. So if people hold to that, and the polls continue to show this ongoing deterioration in Joe Biden's prospects, the question is, will that translate into real pressure on Israel from the United States, not out of any sympathy for the Palestinian people or respect for international law, but simply out of the political needs and exigencies of the Democratic Party and the Biden administration? By the way, speaking of Biden, Tamara, do we have a minute to put up Joe Biden's response to Hamas's announcement that it had received the proposal?
There is some movement, and I don't want to. Well, maybe choose my words. There's some movement. There's been a response from there's been a response.
Oh, it's so painful.
From the opposition, but yes, I'm sorry, from Hamas, but it seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now. There is some movement, and I don't want to.
That's it.
Yeah. So
I mean, it's elder abuse at this point.
But aside from that, look what he said there. I mean, it is painful to watch, because you don't know what he's going to say, and clearly he couldn't remember the name of Hamas. But when he says it's a little over the top, what does that mean, a little over the top? What actually is Hamas and the resistance factions asking for? They're asking for an end to genocide. They're asking for people to be allowed to go back to their homes. They're asking for sufficient supplies of food, water, and medicine for people. They're asking for tents for people to live in while their houses are reconstructed. They're asking for all of this destruction to be rebuilt so that people can live normal lives. And they're asking for negotiations that would lead to a lifting of the siege on Gaza, the tight siege that has been going on for 14, 15 years, and a permanent ceasefire that would produce a durable and sustainable calm for everyone. That's actually what the Hamas and the resistance proposal is. But Joe Biden is saying that's a little over the top. Reconstructing hospitals and supplying them with equipment so they can treat people in Gaza, that's over the top. And I think that that was a reflection of how the United States government really thinks, that Palestinians are just not entitled to a normal life, the basic necessities of life. And of course, it is a major violation of international law that to use humanitarian supplies, water, food, medicine, fuel, as leverage in negotiations, as something you withhold from a civilian population in order to force them or their leadership to act in a certain way. But that's just become a norm in this situation, where Palestinians have to negotiate for food, they have to negotiate for antibiotics, they have to negotiate for bandages, and that's the point we've reached. And Joe Biden is saying it's over the top. They didn't ask for the moon even here. I mean, they haven't even raised in this proposal the bigger political questions about the future of Palestine. If this Hamas proposal were implemented in full, it would, and respected by everyone, it would lead to a reasonable, peaceful life for Palestinians in Gaza and for Israelis, but it wouldn't address the much bigger questions about the situation in Palestine. And yet, Joe Biden is saying it's over the top.
Right. Despicable. Yeah, I guess we're gonna see what happens. We'll see what, and you know, we'll see Blinken returning to his home in Virginia with protesters still outside of his door. Incredible. Let's take a look at some of the comments. Asa, we had a lot, especially about that first segment. Yeah,
we had loads today, and we've got some good ones. So I wanted to start by running through some of the countries. As always, we had people from all around the world. Let's see, Trinidad, Cairo. We always have a lot of viewers from Ireland, at least one from my home country.
Which is Wales.
Well, yes. Sorry for listeners, Wales, Cymru. Somebody from Germany. Our commiserations.
it's amazing that this isn't banned in Germany yet.
Yeah. Turtle Islands, the indigenous name for North America. Copenhagen, Denmark, Norway. I could keep going on and on. Thank you very much to everybody. We were obviously, people were very happy with our interview earlier on in the show with Hazami Barmada. Is that how you say her surname?
Hazami Barmada, yeah.
Barmada. Okay, yes. She was a hit, so people were happy we were having a live interview from the streetsman of the protest outside Antony Blinken's house. So that was great. Thanks for joining us. And also we had a lot of people commenting about the section on BDS that we did as well. Somebody saying people are happy that a few McDonald's have closed down in Malaysia. Somebody said "ha ha ha," which I found amusing. And we had a friend of the show, regular viewer, Roger Waters, of course, of Pink Floyd, writing in suggesting a total boycott of Eurovision because of refusing to ban Israeli entry to the Eurovision Song Contest. When the Eurovision, of course, was in Israel itself. When was that? A couple of years ago.
Right.
Now. Yeah.
Feels like a decade ago, but yeah.
Yeah. There was a very intense campaign around that. Thank you, Roger. We had, of course, a lot of pro Jon Elmer comments. And we had one in Arabic, if I can find it.
This is a good one.
Which do you want to explain that one, Ali, or should we leave that as an Easter egg?
Hold on a second. Yeah, that says Hallelujah John Dweri, and that it means analyze this John Dweri. Of course, that's a reference to Fayez Dweri, the retired Jordanian brigadier general who's become a massive star on Al Jazeera with his analysis of resistance activities and videos. And there was a famous video a couple of weeks ago where a Qassam fighter emerged from a tunnel, fired his RPG at an Israeli target, and then shouted "Halil ya Dweri," and then disappeared back into the tunnel. Analyze this, Dweri. So that became kind of a catchphrase all over the Arab world for a little while. And again, showed the interplay between the resistance fighters and the global audience.
Yeah.
So
on that point, I will have a viewer's question for John, which I will put on the screen now. Isn't it strategically better for Qassam not to the Qassam brigades, the arm wing of Hamas, not to release the videos and keep the occupation army more in the dark about their tactics? What's your view of this, John?
Oh, I mean, just the information value of getting the videos out, I think would trump that. But we do see the videos are careful. We saw the IED one in Khan Yunis. They blurred the buildings around it. So we do see them taking operational security in the videos. But no, I think that the information operations are a critical point. And so I think they are willing to sacrifice those positions. I think most of the positions they have to flee from anyway after firing because they'll be tracked. They're fired. That's why one of the reasons why you see them scooting out of the frame all the time is because they compromise their position just by carrying out the operation in the first place. So I think that the value of the information would trump any operational security, although we do see them blur the videos in key ways.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Commander John.
And I think the value, if I can just say, the value of understanding what's happening on the ground is so important, because this kind of analysis of the resistance and the videos, you can find it on Al Jazeera and in Arabic media, but I don't see it anywhere available to a global audience, to an English-speaking audience, the way we're doing it here. And I think if you don't understand the reality on the ground, you can't ultimately understand the politics. So I do think there's a value to it. I know people, there's certainly a satisfaction in seeing resistance fighters blow up Israeli tanks. I won't deny that. But I think there is a greater value also to understanding the full picture. And what we aim to do here is to provide the kind of information and analysis that you're not going to get somewhere else. Otherwise, what's the point? We want to provide something that adds to people's understanding and knowledge.
Yeah, and just remember too that Israel blacked out the Gaza Strip, so there's no communications, no proper communications. So we don't get any of that information that we would get from the civilian population. So it makes the resistance videos even more important under the blackout.
100%. We had a couple of people as well mentioning earlier in the live chat. This viewer says, congratulations to Professor David Miller for winning his case against the University of Bristol. And another commenter who I couldn't find to save the comment pointed out that we did a interview with David Miller in 2022, just after he was fired by Bristol University for opposing Zionism and criticizing Israel's actions. So go and check that out on our YouTube channel. Thank you. Tamara's just put it up on the screen there. David Miller, why we have to talk about Zionism. It will be in our podcast feed, audio feed as well, on your platforms, preferred platforms. So check
And
that
yeah,
out.
give us a thumbnail background on what happened to David Miller and why this court verdict is so important.
David Miller is one of the world's leading experts in, well, at this point, one of the world's leading experts, certainly in is Islamophobia and how it manifests itself, especially in Britain, but in the Zionist movement and in the Israel lobby. And he's got a long history of academic analysis of propaganda and disinformation. And around about a decade or so ago, he moved on and started focusing on the Israel lobby, and he very quickly became a primary target within Britain of the Israel lobby, and eventually they succeeded in having him fired. He became I mean, one of the things the propaganda points that said about him is that students at Bristol University, his students felt threatened. Which was a complete lie. It was an Israel lobby campaign led by the CST, a pro-Israel group we've talked about in the past many times, basically the British equivalent of the ADL, and the Union of Jewish Students, which is affiliated to the Zionist movement, and indirectly, and it gets funding from the State of Israel itself. And they found a student on campus to essentially front their campaign.
Right.
Well, a couple of students, including Sabrina Miller, David's coincidental namesake, who is now, I don't want to dignify it by saying she's a journalist, but she has employment in right-wing tabloids in Britain. Anyway,
I just want to say, I was kind of digging around on the bookshelf behind me. I can't find it now, but one of the books I have somewhere here is a book published in the 90s called Rethinking Northern Ireland, edited by David Miller. And I read that book, maybe 15, 20 years ago. I had no idea who David Miller was. It's a brilliant book that really, I think, was one of the first comprehensive examinations of the situation in Ireland through the lens of settler colonialism. Believe it or not, until that time, people talked about Northern Ireland primarily as a religious conflict or a sectarian conflict, and all sorts of different ways. And so this book, edited by David Miller, profoundly changed the way people thought about Ireland as what now seems very obvious in hindsight, as an example, like Palestine, like South Africa, like other places in the world, of settler colonialism. And that's to say, David Miller has a very long and serious history as an academic, as a scholar, as someone who seeks understanding of the world. And yet he was caricatured and demonized in the last few years by the Israel lobby, to the point where he was fired by Bristol University, which now has been forced to acknowledge by a court of law in the UK, by an employment tribunal, that firing was false, that his anti-Zionist views are protected, that there was nothing discriminatory about them. And it's an important consequential victory, not just for David Miller personally, but I think for all of us in this ongoing battle for the freedom to speak and advocate for what is right and just in Palestine.
Yeah, it's a very important precedent, really, in employment law in Britain. So, yeah. So to say as well that we have booked David for the live stream next week. So we, all going to plan, he will be on the live stream again next week to talk about that in more detail. And I also wanted to plug a recent conversation Nora did
I mean, I
with
just say, Asa,
yeah.
David has agreed in principle to come on the live stream, and we're trying to sort it out. But
Yeah.
we will confirm it as soon as we can.
Yeah, all being well.
Yeah.
He's very busy at the moment. He's much in demand. So Nora did this wonderful interview, which you should all go and watch or listen to, with Layla Bakker. Nora, did you want to give us a little preview of what that's about?
Yeah, it's not an easy topic to cover, but I thought it was really important. Layla Bakker is the regional director for the UN Population Fund, which is the agency for sexual and reproductive health. And I just wanted to ask her about what it is like for women in Gaza who are due to give birth, or girls and women who are menstruating in Gaza right now, and how Israel's ongoing attacks, the forced mass displacement, these overcrowded, unsanitary shelters, lack of medicine, lack of water, lack of food, lack of basic supplies are contributing to really horrifying health outcomes for women and girls. And their babies, women and their babies. What does dehydration and malnutrition and lack of prenatal care, psychological trauma and physical trauma, how does that all contribute to healthy outcomes for infants, for example? So really hard conversation, but I think a very necessary one, especially when we have people like Hillary Clinton, running around talking about Israeli feminism and the girl boss feminists in the Israeli army.
If I may say about that, Nora,
Yeah.
This interview with Layla Bakker, is it Bakker or Baker?
Bakker.
Yeah, Layla Bakker is so important, and the situation of women and girls in Gaza is so horrifying and so deliberately inflicted, and it's getting little to no attention.
Right.
And on Friday, so that's after tomorrow, Hillary Clinton, war criminal Hillary Clinton, is hosting a conference at Columbia University where she's been given a teaching position. Talk about safety on campus. What's it like when your professor is a war criminal?
Right.
How safe do you feel then? She is hosting a conference on sexual violence in wartime, which is going to repeat and launder Israel's lies about mass rapes. It's atrocity propaganda about mass rapes that we have debunked on this live stream now numerous times. And they're not going to be talking about this. They're going.
And who else is on the panel, right?
Well, who else is on the panel? Jeffrey Gettleman,
Yeah.
the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times fraudster, who published that fraudulent so-called investigation into mass rapes on October 7th. And other U.S. government officials like Linda Thomas Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador at the United Nations, and a lot of ex-government officials, all pushing this anti-Palestinian atrocity propaganda. I'm told that several prominent scholars refused to take part in this. I guess there is a broad understanding that this is political propaganda disguised as an academic conference at Columbia University, and they will not be talking about the sexual violence that Israel is carrying out against Palestinian women, the sexual, reproductive, and health violence that Israel is carrying out against women as a whole. So I cannot recommend enough that interview that you did with Layla Bakker, and I encourage people to watch it and share it. It's very important to share this information.
100%.
Thanks.
Well, just to wrap up the comments, finally, a lot of people noticed, a lot of our viewers this week noticed that our YouTube channel has hit 100,000 subscribers and saying congratulations. So thank you everybody who has, we
YouTube has
say
to give us
every,
like a physical plaque, right? We get like something in the mail for that.
yeah, well, apparently there's a YouTube silver trophy for reaching 100,000 subscribers. So
Amazing.
we'll,
It's a
we'll see.
participation trophy, but yeah.
We'll see on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you everybody. Thank you everybody who liked and subscribed the stream. Thank you everybody who's joined tonight, and thank you for letting us reach 100,000 subscribers.
Yeah.
And more importantly, letting, for us, like everything else, like our website, like social media, this is a platform to get the information out. And we do this in partnership with you. So take what we're saying here, take the articles that we're publishing at the Electronic Intifada, especially from our writers in Gaza, and share them, spread them, and don't stop talking about Gaza.
That's right. Thank you so much, Tamara Nassar, behind the scenes, our producer and director extraordinaire. Thank you, Tamara, Jon, Asa, Ali, and everyone else at EI doing extraordinary work day in and day out. Thanks so much. Like and subscribe. You can subscribe to this YouTube channel and get notified when our next live stream is scheduled, but also sign up for our mailing list at
that get updates button at the top left of the website. That's where you sign up. And if you want to, and if you can, make a contribution to our work. That's how we pay for everything you see, is through the support of our readers and viewers. And we will never charge for EI. You'll never see a paywall. It's all this work we do is free for everyone in the world. But if you can make a gift to support it, then you're giving this to the whole world. So that's how it works. We can't do this without you. So just a gentle reminder, and also another opportunity to say thank you to everyone who does, especially those of you who have made the commitment to give us a monthly gift, which you can also do at that same link.
Thank you, everybody, and we will see you next time. Take care.